Hello folks, Dick Fairburn here. It's late August 2023. Are you an eastern hunter who grew up shooting whitetails, maybe black bear, pigs if you're down south? You may get a lot of hunting in, but you haven't ventured west. I know a lot of hunters that would really like to go west, and when you ask them the thing they'd first like to hunt there, normally it's an elk. I'm not sure if they know what they're biting off when they say, I want to go elk hunting. I'll give you my 2 cents and some tips about how to be prepared for next year, because you're looking at least a year out before you can plan such a trip. If you want my thoughts, hang around, because I'm going to be back in just a minute. Almost 40 years ago, I moved west and took a job in Wyoming. That was a dream. I thought, gee, I'm going to get to go elk hunting, pronghorn antelope, bighorn sheep, maybe if I can draw a tag, all the things I dreamed about, all the things I'd read about reading the old timers of Elmer Keith and Jack O'Connor. I found out that elk hunting is tougher than I thought it would be. And I'm not going to claim to be a great slayer of elk. I lived there for 10 years. I hunted about 8 of those years for elk, and I killed 1. And it was almost an accident. I'll tell you that story sometime. It just seemed like elk were my nemesis. I did great on antelope, mule deer. I never killed a sheep of my own, but I got to go with a buddy when he drew a tag. Got to get a lot of great experiences. I even worked for an outfitter guiding for deer and antelope a couple of times. But I just couldn't seem to get the sights on elk very often. Now my buddy Mark, on the other hand, if we were hunting in our normal area, perhaps we'd be at the top of a ridge and you go down the left side, I'll go down the right side, we'll meet at the bottom. That way we're looking into 2 little small drainages, twice the chance of coming into elk. And usually about halfway down my walk, I would hear shooting on the other side. And then I would use my horses to help pack out the elk he had found, because he always found elk, and a lot of times I didn't. Several different times I'd had a cow tag and had 4 giant, beautiful bulls walk in front of me in a meadow. There were times I just didn't have the right tag for what I was seeing. Mark, on the other hand, I really believe could go to New York City with a cow call and call elk in Central Park. They just seemed to flock to him. So think about elk hunting if you want. It's a great dream, and it's an even greater reality when you get to go. But there's some things you need to prepare for before you go. The first thing is to decide where you're going to hunt. And even if you're east of the Mississippi, there are several states now that have elk. They have been transplanted. When the Europeans first came to this continent, elk were all the way east. Even Long Island had elk. But they got pushed ahead of that manifest destiny and got extirpated, I believe is the word that the biologists use. They're not extinct by any means, but they're extinct in a given area is kind of what that means. And so the elk got pushed further and further west. But I know for a fact they're in Kentucky. I believe they're in Tennessee. Michigan has some elk. There are eastern states that have transplanted them. If you live in one of those states, and I suggest you get into that draw system and try to get one of those tags. Doing an elk hunt close to home for your first one is going to be so much easier. You're going to know the country better. You're going to have contacts there that can give you a hand. And hunting elk on a solo operation is not something I recommend unless you are very experienced, especially in the Rocky Mountains. The bulk of the elk, of course, are in the Rocky Mountains. West of Nebraska, we will say, and from western Texas, I believe, has some elk, all the way to Canada and the western Canadian provinces as well. That's not going to be an easy draw. A lot of people are out there vying for those tags, and there are tag services that can help you apply to as many states as you want to. If you think you're going to do a DIY hunt for elk, then there are ways to do it. I suggest you do it as a party. And in most states, if you apply as a party, say 3 or 4 hunters, typically if any one of you draws a tag, then your party will all get tags. So you have better odds to draw. At least that's the way it works in Wyoming. And I have not applied for elk in other states, so I'm not an expert there by any means. If you got the money, of course, you can find an outfitter in one of the western states. They will help you put in for the draw and get the tags. Those things are pretty pricey. The last I knew, bargain basement, full outfitter trips were probably $7,500 and up. And if you want to go to the Vermejo Park Ranch in New Mexico or someplace like that, you're talking well into the teens of thousands. One sleeper spot is the NRA Whittington Center in New Mexico. It actually shares a boundary. Its north boundary is the south boundary of the Vermejo Park Ranch. So you're hunting those same tremendous bulls. You can do it for a lot less by and they will guide you. They will essentially outfit you on your hunt there and help you get the elk out. So that's one really good way to get a lower priced chance at a really good bull. And you can contact the NRA Whittington Center online and see what their program takes. There again, you're not going to do it this year. You might get in next year. It may be 2 years before you're going to get your name to roll up and do that. If you're willing to take a cow hunt in any of these states, it's going to be easier to draw, and in many of those states, the tag is going to be less expensive as well. About a month ago, I drew a cow tag in the area where I normally hunted when I lived in Wyoming. And I have friends there. They have the knowledge, they have the gear, either UTVs or in some cases horses to pack the meat out. And that's one of the things you need to think about. If you're going to go do a DIY hunt in Wyoming, Colorado, Montana, Idaho, there's, virtually all the western states have them. The Rocky Mountain elk are widely distributed. The lesser widely known elk are the Roosevelt elk. They're much bigger bodies and more prone to crowning at the end of their antlers, more like a red deer in Scotland or in Europe. They're in the Pacific Northwest. In Colorado, they have a smaller version of the elk called a Tule elk. And in fact, when I was in the Army in 1979, the Army base I was on in California was one of the transplant locations where they were getting the Tule elk back from almost extinction. And those tags are going to be very hard to come by. Guys trying to round out an elk slam or something like that are really vying for those Tule elk tags. So I would recommend you go with typical Rocky Mountain elk in one of the states that has a lot of elk and therefore a lot of tags. Finding a place to hunt within the area you draw is not going to be a problem because many of those western states have 50% or more of their land mass is public land, national forests, Bureau of Land Management land. There's a few other types of federal land that you can get full access to. But you need to do your research up front. So pick a state, find out how they issue their tags, their draw system, and everything else. In many of these states now, you're going to have to build up points. Points came in, about 20 years ago in a lot of states. As an example, in Wyoming, when I moved there, I knew some people who had put in for a bighorn sheep tag all of their life, maybe 25 years, and had never drawn one. So eventually Wyoming went to a point system. You get a point in your first year that you don't draw. And those points add up. So it depends on the state. They have different systems. Wyoming's system was that whoever had the most points got the tags. And that meant you essentially had to buy points or have unsuccessful draws for 13, 14, 15 years before you really stood a chance of getting a tag. They're working on that some. Some of the states, I believe Colorado draw is that you get points. And essentially, if you have 10 points, then they're going to throw your name in the hat for that tag 10 different times. So you have 10 chances to draw. They each have their system. Tags the point system is what we have, and it's not likely to change. So you need to learn that system in any state you're interested in. Once you get those tags, there are options. I mentioned a full outfitter hunt. If you go full wilderness hunt where you're packing in on horses quite a ways, that can be pretty expensive. The only one of those I've ever done was for a Shiras moose, the moose over my right shoulder here. I had drawn a tag in a wilderness area of Wyoming. I had enough points to get it. My buddy Mark and I were going to do the hunt ourselves. Unfortunately, he had a medical issue crop up in his family that was going to prevent him from going. So I booked an outfitter, and I got the full trip. And then, if you can afford it, that's pretty nice. I mean, there were elk hunters in camp. I was the only moose hunter, so I had my own sleeping tent. They'd come in the morning and light the wood stove, get it warm in there. I'd get up, get dressed, go to the cook shack, have breakfast. They would have my horse saddled for me and ready to go. It's a cool way to do it. And then whatever you kill, they're going to get it out for you. They're going to pack it out on horses or mules, typically if you're in those wilderness areas. And any die-hard hunter really owes himself that full wilderness trip at least once in his life. I'm not sure if I'll do it again, but I'd love to. If you're going to do DIY, then you have some things you need to discuss. How are you going to camp? You're taking a trailer with you, you're taking a tent. We used to set up a pretty substantial tent camp where I hunted with my friends there. Typically we'd have 4 or 5 wall tents. One was set up as the cook shack, and a lot of time Mark's mom would actually come and do all the cooking for us, so it was great. Now those tent camps are gone because those areas in Wyoming have seen a huge influx of grizzly bears. And so if you're going to camp during hunting season, it's going to have to be a hard side camper. It's going to have to be something that's grizzly bear proof. And you need to have your food inside or hung in trees or in bear proof containers. It's another factor that you have to look at. If you're not in grizzly country, then certainly you can camp. Do you have that camp gear? Or do the people in your party, can you pool your resources and get the camp you need? And depending on what time of the year you go, you're going to need some heat in that tent. Can you put a wood stove in there? Can you heat it with propane or some other source? You may see some really tough weather during elk season. The early seasons are delightful. You'll get up to frost in the morning, but it'll be up in the 50s in the daytime, and it's just glorious. The aspens are yellow, the elk are bugling. It's just a magical time of the year in the Rockies. I'm going to do a series here in the next couple of weeks on western hunting in general and specifically elk hunting, because I've got one coming up. And preparing for the hunt, in my opinion, is almost more fun than the hunt itself sometimes. So what other kind of gear are you going to need? I'm going to do a separate one on rifles and ammunition, what I think you need for elk. And as I said, I've only killed one myself. In fact, I killed that with a borrowed rifle. I didn't have a rifle with me the day I stumbled across the elk. I borrowed my buddy's. But I have been in on the killing of quite a few elk, and I have been in on the quartering and horseback packing out of quite a few more. And I've seen what I think works the best for rifles. And I can tell you, if you hit an elk solid with a good sized bullet of good construction, you're going to get that elk. If you muff the shot on the first one, that elk can pack lead for miles. So you'd better get more hits in as quickly as you can. But the most important thing to do is to make that first shot count. And I think you probably need more gun than some people take for elk hunting. But as I said, that'll be a separate video. What else do you need? You're going to need some kind of backpack or large fanny pack. You're going to need binoculars, good optics, good binoculars, a laser rangefinder, and I carry 2. I have a small Leica handheld laser rangefinder, and I also have laser binoculars, so I've got that backup system. As long as a couple of you have lasers, you can back each other up on that. But to do long-range shooting nowadays, you got to know the distance exactly. When I moved out there, I took a 300 Winchester Magnum as my intended elk cartridge. And all I can say is that was a bad luck rifle. It was a Ruger 77, and when I first started to work up loads with factory ammunition, the cases would stick. I mean, you have to beat the bolt open with a stick to get the empties out. Sent it back to Ruger, and they said, yeah, the chamber's all messed up. It shouldn't have got out of the factory that way. They replaced it. So the first year I actually took it elk hunted, I had worked up a load with 200 grain Spear soft points. A lot of the premium bullets of the time didn't exist. Really, the only premium bullet at the time was the Nosler Partition. And I hit pretty well out to some pretty long known distances with that 300 Winchester Magnum. I just had a duplex reticle, so I didn't really have much in the way of extra aiming points. And really no way to know distance the first year. And I missed a big bull at what I thought was 300 or 400 yards, but in retrospect it was probably much more than that. And then, walking away from that shooting event, I happened to see a cow laying in the timber, my first chance at an elk. I thought, shucks, I got an any elk tag, I'll shoot a cow. Took a rest against a tree, she's about 180 yards away, laying down, and I missed again. When I got back to the truck, I looked the rifle over, and I discovered that, Ruger, like most rifles, there are 2 action screws that hold the action in the stock. The rear action screw was missing. So this thing was tilted badly. Luckily, the gunsmith in town had another screw to fit it. We tightened it back down, but before I did, I took it to the range, and it was hitting 18 inches below where I had sighted it originally. So losing that tang screw had caused it to be way, way off. And it points up to something that you want to check often. Just a few months ago, I was in Wyoming filming bear hunting. We were not successful. And if you want to look at my bear video, you'll see why. But one lady that my buddy Mark was taking up, a friend of his he was taking up to get a chance at a bear, she had a Tika T3 light. And I was setting my camera up, and Mark was in kind of the hide with Mary. And I saw him pick her rifle up and look at it and then lay it back down. And when we got out that night, I said, what were you looking at on Mary's rifle? And he goes, the back guard screw is missing. So there's no way this thing is going to be sighted incorrectly. We were up in camp. Mark happened to have a Tika T3 light. So we took the rear guard screw out of his, put it in Mary's, torqued it back down, checked it. It was dead on zero, just like it would have been. But had a bear shown up that night, she would have had to borrow a rifle, not knowing where that thing was going to have to hit. Those are the things you need to check in. Check your gear all the time. You're going to need a knife, of course, if you get an elk to process it. You're going to need some kind of saw to saw through the pelvis. This is not just, pounding a knife back through the pelvis to break this elk open on the rear end. And if you need to quarter it up into smaller sections to pack it out, get it on a horse, however you're going to do that, you may need more gear than just the knife and the saw. When I did the quartering job, I carried 2 small hatchets and was able to split right down through the spine. And we would usually leave the skin intact, especially on the front quarters. So we'd split the spine so that it would hang on both sides of the horse. We left the skin on, and we'd put a slot in there and just kind of buttonhole it on the saddle horn of our saddle and then tie it down underneath, and you had a really good way to pack out the quarters, front or rear. But you need a way to get in there and split that spine and get that animal cut into 4 pieces. I'm sure that a lot of ranch hunts where you're hunting lower and maybe hunting out of a UTV or a pickup truck, it's possible that a lot of those elk go to town whole or maybe halved. When I was hunting out there afoot or horseback, very few elk went to town whole. They went to town generally cut into quarters and then skinned out when you got home, or if you're going to take it to a processor. It's a good idea to have a GPS unit with you that's big country. You can get turned around pretty easily. Or a phone with a hunting app. I use Onyx, and I've had very good luck with it. You can get that for all 50 states, and it will tell you exactly where you are, because a lot of that land is a patchwork of privately owned, deeded land and various tracts of federal land. And so you need to know where you are. When I said that few elk went to town whole, the one that I killed in Wyoming did happen to go to town whole. It's a good story, I'll tell you sometime. But the question is, even if you're able to hunt on foot in very rugged country, what are you going to do if you nail a 600-pound bull up in tough country? How are you going to get it out? I learned early on, my first year hunting, when I didn't kill an elk, but I helped pack them out, I figured out that if you can't get a vehicle to it or a horse to it, that means you're going to pack it out on your back. Now, my buddy Mark does that. He's always been a lot tougher than I am. And in my current state of health, that's almost an impossibility. So the old joke in Wyoming was, if you can't get a horse or a truck to it, then you probably better take some salt and pepper and a knife and fork, because you're going to have to stay there until it's gone. Most states require you to take all of that viable meat out. You don't have to keep internal organs like the liver or heart, although the heart is quite a delicacy to many people. You generally don't have to bring out the ribs, although in Alaska you do. But the point is, you've got to bring out 300 or 400 pounds of dead weight. And if you're not in the condition and you don't have the equipment to pack that out on your back, then you better plan ahead. One way to do that with an outfitting service is some of them will do what they call a drop camp. If you get 2 or 3 guys together, you can hire them to take you in horseback, drop you at a camp, and they'll either supply the camp or they'll pack in your own stuff. And then at a predetermined time, they're going to come get you and pack you and your meat back out. You may still need brute force to get your meat to camp. And if you are in Montana, Wyoming, or Idaho, dealing with grizzly bears, that could be a real problem. But look into the possibility of a drop camp as a much lower cost way to get that horsepower you need to get back into that beautiful wild country. Tag fees, I'm not going to go over. I can tell you that a leftover cow tag in Wyoming is $288. A bull tag, I believe, is over $600 now. You're going to pay close to that, or perhaps more than that, in any state. So you got to factor that in. Generally, if you put in for the draw and don't get it, you'll get your money returned. Generally, with them keeping a little bit to buy you that point so that you're a step up for next year. Cow tags are an easy way to go. Even with outfitted hunts, a lot of times a cow hunt can be had for half the price or less of a bull hunt. And I can tell you that elk are excellent meat. They essentially eat grass like cattle. They're not fat. They're game meat, but it's really good stuff. The only thing I've found better than elk is perhaps pronghorn antelope is really kind of my favorite, if it's taken care of properly. And mountain sheep is the best, but that's kind of a once-in-a-lifetime experience for most people. For a lot of hunters, it'll be never in a lifetime. I said I'd talk about rifles separately, but I will tell you this. A lot of people have asked me, what do you think about a 6.5 Creedmoor for elk hunting? And that has become one of the most popular cartridges out there. It was designed as a long-range target cartridge, and I think it excels at that. Personally, I think it's a little bit light for elk. Deer and antelope, I wouldn't hesitate at all. But I really think you need something in the 270, 280, 30-06 class or bigger to do a good job on elk, and only then with premium bullets. And if you couple premium bullets out of a good cartridge, a laser rangefinder, and a way to use that distance knowledge to get good hits, you can shoot an elk from a fair piece away. And a couple of the last videos I'm going to do in this series is some of the more technical stuff you need to know about long-range shooting, like uphill, downhill angles, how to factor in wind corrections and things like that. But if you have the right rifle, scope, and rangefinder, you can be very well prepared to take an elk. Optics, I'll say this, buy the best you can. I'd say at least a 3 to 9 if you're in the variable range. More on the upper end is okay, but you really don't need a giant Mount Palomar type scope. You don't need to be in the 20 or 25 power range with an elk scope, because even in cold weather you can deal with mirage off the ground. Hot weather you can certainly deal with it. A lot of times you can't use that level of magnification. So my 338 Win Mag is my primary elk cartridge. I have a Leupold VX6 HD. It's a 2 to 12. I think that's the perfect kind of optical magnification to get done what you need to do. It has the CDS system, so I can dial in the exact range. It also has what they call a TMOA reticle that I'll show you, tactical minute of angle reticle, that is illuminated if I want it to be. And so it has hash marks every minute of angle, which is roughly 1 inch per 100 yards. So you can do some very precise work with a rifle in the scope of like that. If you're interested in elk hunting, then I want you to watch the rest of the videos that I have coming up. I'm going to talk about rifles and cartridges and bullets. And as I said, then I'm going to talk about trajectory compensation and wind compensation and how to get a hit at 300 yards or more. Even if you don't have that kind of gear, if you've just got a good solid rifle, you've got a good solid scope with a duplex type reticle, I'll show you how to set your maximum point blank range that's still going to make you very capable of 300 to maybe 400 yard shots with the gear you already have. So you don't necessarily need to go buy a big boomer for elk. You don't need a .338 Winchester in my opinion, but I think if you can use that kind of power effectively, that might be the ultimate cartridge for elk. So this is just a kind of an intro, whet your appetite and say, you want to go shoot an elk? I'm going to throw some of the problems out in front of you, and as we go through the next videos, I'll throw some solutions out, and hopefully you can put together that hunt of a lifetime, whether it's going to be riding a horse or a DIY, or maybe you and some buddies just go camp in the national forest and still have a pretty good chance of coming home with elk meat. It's fantastic, and I'll tell you, the Rocky Mountains in September, October, even into November, it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. If you've ever heard an elk bugle in the wild during their rutting from like mid-September to mid-October, you'll never forget that. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I ask you and I encourage you to subscribe if you think I'm doing good work here. Give me a thumbs up, and I'll have more elk, more western hunting videos out very shortly. Thank you. Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, bud? Okay, girl, last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah. That's all there is till next time.